On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Clay Alvord. He is a senior manager at Box. He is responsible for two different teams, infrastructure automation engineering and cloud service engineering. We're going to be talking about how he manages the work and how he organizes work for his team. He's responsible for a lot of the infrastructure DevOps side. We're going to be talking about how he manages software engineers, not being a software engineer himself, but he's been doing this for a long time. He's got some great insights. Clay, I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Let's start at the top. Two things we like to get out of the way first is I'm sure a lot of people know who Box is, but just tell us, what Box does. And also, I mentioned obviously high level what your two teams are that you manage, but also tell us what your responsibilities are, and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Box is a cloud content company. It originally started as a online storage company. You could plug our online-based storage into the back end of an application. We could be the storage component of, say, like a copier at Kinko's or things like that. Or we could be the storage component on when you take a photo of a check that you upload to your bank for deposit. But we've then grown way beyond that. We now have a huge repository of data from enterprise and individual users from across the globe. And so now we're now managing that content, doing things like leveraging artificial intelligence to apply permissions to tools or to your uploaded data. So if you upload something confidential, it'll do logic against that and recognize that this is a confidential item and apply recommended permissions based on that. We have things like integrated DocuSign style signing of documents. We have workflow engines and things like that. So you can actually map out a workflow. When this gets signed, send this file over to the next person in the process, and that kind of thing, and a bunch of other stuff. So really content cloud management.
Yeah, it's grown leaps and bounds from what I originally started with the product. And then what are your responsibilities? I know you manage two teams, but if you give us a high level, that'd be great.
Yeah, so Box is in this interesting transitional phase between physical on-prem data centers and the public cloud. So one of my teams manages the tooling and infrastructure necessary to maintain our on-prem data centers, as well as builds a number of just productivity engineering style tools, things that automate repetitive tasks, things that allow us to divest of what we call run the business, basically those everyday things you need to keep your business working, keep your lights on kind of a deal. My other team, they're basically like the mirror image of that team, but for the public cloud. So we are the root key holders of all of our public clouds. We're in 4 different ones. We maintain the tools and automation for the entire lifecycle management of those public cloud resources, creating accounts, projects, applying permissions, things like that. We're also the subject matter experts when it comes to the public cloud. So as, say, for example, the network team wants to build a new thing or re-engineer something that already got in place, they pull us in for consultation and that kind of thing as well. And then we're a large contributor to our IAC or infrastructure as code pipelines for monitoring and deploying and just object creation within the public cloud itself.
Awesome. I guess let's better understand, who's on your team. Obviously, different skill sets, but give us a high level of who makes up these teams for you.
Yeah, so the first team, infrastructure automation engineering, started out as just a handful of data center engineers that knew how to write Bash and a little bit of Python. And from there, we grew our skills, and we also hired a number of people to become a full stack DevOps organization. So it's a combination of kind of some homegrown skills as well as some people hired from without that have had long careers in software development. And we run the spectrum in skill levels there. For the cloud infrastructure team, that team is a little bit similar. We actually have a couple of members of our former network operations center who knew how to code in Python, that had a background in security and had some experience with the public clouds. And so we pulled them over, as well as hired some software developers that actually had experience, not just deploying to public clouds, but actually writing software to govern and manage the public clouds themselves. So both teams have a variety of skill sets, but we're in both cases, we're full stack engineering. So when we build a tool, we build every element of it. So we design the database schemas, we build the databases, we build the APIs, We manage the front end. We do a lot of our own UI and front end work and that kind of thing. So just about every aspect of software development, we do.
Absolutely. I guess you touched on there's a specific role in your team I was going to ask you about, the full stack DevOps developer. We talked about that when we first had conversations about the podcast, and I was really interested in the role. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah. So a great example of one of the tools that we've built is Box. In order to be competitive in the market with Dropbox and Amazon and SharePoint and all the others, is our compliance posture. So we have something like 20 plus certifications, federal, PCI, ISO, all the names and acronyms you've heard of before. The challenge is, in order to maintain those, we get audited by external auditors every quarter. And there could be as many as 20 different audits asking the same questions. But the evidence that you provide to those auditors have a window. Evidence must have been collected within the window that's in scope for the audit. And because some of the controls are really kind of low level in nature, they require infrastructure-based logs, for example. The level of effort to go out and pull the same logs repetitively all the time, it can be very high, even though it's not very complicated. And you have to generally have someone with knowledge of the process and access to the tool to do that. So that's generally a high-paid engineer. So what we decided to do was build a system that allows you to automate that. And so when we first started looking at how we would design such a system, we looked at, what kinds of tools might exist out in the public and versus what we had internally and that kind of thing. And what we ultimately settled on is we wanted to build something ourselves that gave us complete control of how the infrastructure works. So it could work with the tools and frameworks and things like that we've already got internally. But we also wanted to have control over the models. So we didn't want to just take something right off the shelf. And we wanted to be able to design our own front end. So as we did this highly customizable thing based on our customer needs, we had the ability to do that. So I have engineers that will run a project like that. They will design the back end completely, figure out what kind of database technology is best used for this kind of thing. They'll work with internal database teams to see what kinds of databases exist out there. So we don't have to maintain our own cluster, but we can leverage that existing database. We use a variety of different APIs internally and API frameworks. We most recently are using Django. It's a Python-based framework. We use both REST and GraphQL APIs. And now we're starting to look at doing React front-end because the Box front-end team builds a lot of their resources in React and makes these libraries available to us. And you generally have a single engineer that will have an idea about how this whole thing works from the back end all the way to the front end and how they all play together. They may not necessarily be a subject matter expert in every one thing, but there is someone on the team that might be. But still, this full stack engineer will be able to design, lay out, and orchestrate the entire thing.
Interesting. I want to talk about how you go about managing and organizing work. Obviously, what's the process, managing this many different people. But I guess before we dive into that, I think you mentioned you're not a software engineer by training. Obviously, you're more on the admin, more the infrastructure side. You're managing software engineers. How does that work for you? Obviously, how do you relate to them? How granular do you get with them when they're going through their one-on-ones and that type of thing?
So I still come from an engineering background. I was a data center engineer, so a lot more physical and hands-on style. Most of my coding was very simple Python and Bash, things of that nature, never full stack software. One of the things that I think is most important is when you have full stack, or not just full stack, but when you have software developers and you're not a software developer yourself, you need to double down on some things that really make sure that they're engaged and happy. So in order to keep them really kind of engaged in the process, you need to make sure that they feel empowered and they're supported. You need to make sure that they understand what the impact is of the thing they're delivering. Because if you are just saying, go build this feature, go build this function, they might not necessarily be challenged by that. You really want to drive their personal buy-in into the thing that they're producing in order to keep them engaged and keep them innovating and really get them into a situation where they want to build something cooler or better. So getting their buy-in on how important the thing is just super important. The other thing is a lot of times you have really smart engineers that just want to be in the code and want to be in the design, but they don't necessarily want to do all of the other things that you have to do when you're part of a business unit. So when you come up with a new idea, you can't just start building it. You have to justify the reason to build it. You have to prove that value. Not only that, you then have to kind of put together a plan. You have to communicate updates. There's a lot of kind of logistics there. There's also, we're not a large company, but we're still more than 1,000 people spread across continents. So when you're at a company this size and you want to leverage other internal components, and with COVID and everyone working from home, it's not so easy to just walk over to another desk and say, hey, how do you do this thing? Or do you have something that meets this need? So it's partnering with people and finding out where things are and how they work, and then seeing how they integrate. And a lot of those logistics, engineers don't necessarily enjoy doing. And so being able to partner with your engineers and take that burden off of them not only makes them grateful for you to do that, but it also gives them more dedicated time to produce the things that they're best at. So kind of in a nutshell, I make sure that my people are really engaged in what they're producing and why it's valuable. And I make sure that they feel empowered to try new things. And I take a lot of the burden of the kind of administrative stuff off their plates. And then lastly, celebrate their wins as loudly as you can. So someone ships a new feature, finally figures out a hurdle, get their name out there. And don't just present it and be like, don't use the royal we and say, look what we produced. Let them give the talk or put their name on the presentation. Really trumpet their successes. Show them that the thing that they're doing is appreciated and valued. So these are all successful. You don't necessarily have to be a non-engineer manager to use these things. But when you earnestly put effort into those things, my people appreciate it. They know that I care about them. They know that I'm vested in their success. And that just really engages them to do their best work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are some great management pointers that you provided, regardless of who you're managing or what organization. I guess you do have these different skill sets on the team. And obviously, I don't know if you have help in terms of a manager managing these different teams or leads, but I guess within the construct of these teams that you're managing, there's different types of skill sets. How do you manage? Obviously, somebody has to take the hat on, hat off to help at some point manage these different types of skill sets.
So it's really important that you don't necessarily have to be a programmer yourself, but you can't be ignorant of the topic. So I have a stack of books on design models and architectures. I can speak the vernacular, I know the terms. I might not know the syntax, I might not be able to write the code itself, but I take a lot of time to educate myself. I ask questions. So when they start digging into the technical details of something, if there isn't a concept I understand, I try and make sure that I understand it. And I make sure that my people know that I'm putting forward this effort so that I can be a more intelligent manager when it comes to running this kind of thing. That said, I will never be a subject matter expert. And so it's important when you put together your team that you identify those people that have the aptitude to do that. And what I've done is make sure that as I've formed my teams, I've been very transparent with my senior people that I've brought on and say, hey, look, these are the areas that I'm good at. These are the things I'm passionate about. These are the areas where I've got opportunities and where I'm going to need your help and your influence here. So from the very first conversations, I explained to them, outside of writing code, what are the values that I would like your help in bringing to the team? What can you do? And people take that very complimentary, I think. They like being involved in not just simply producing a thing, but also how the team works. I also am a strong advocate for setting up mentors. So when you have a subject matter expert on a technology or a process, I like to make sure that I know that. And then when I notice that someone else isn't, I partner with them in a formal way and say, hey, this person over here has not touched this technology before or this process. This person here has a lifetime of experience in it. Allow me to set up some time with you guys so that you guys can talk and maybe even work together on a thing. The other thing that I do to make sure that I've got visibility into kind of who knows what is on a quarterly basis, I basically send out a big questionnaire that talks about all these different technologies and things, and you get 3 prompts, whether you're comfortable, not very comfortable, or unfamiliar with that technology or process or tool. And I just use a simple Google Forms. And at the very end, you get kind of a heat map. And so you can see, oh, it looks like there's a lot of comfort on this technology, or you know what, there's a big gap here. Or maybe if you've got, say, a team of 6 people, and there's only one person who says he's comfortable and everyone else says they're not comfortable at all, you have a single point of failure. So I take a proactive approach in making sure that I don't have single points of failure and that cross-training and mentorship is always available to those who need it.
Awesome. That's a great way to approach it. And I really like the fact that you mentioned being transparent with your team, and understanding, being able to communicate those weaknesses with them, for them to be aware there's opportunities for them to grow and not only help, the team, but help themselves.
Yep.
So I guess when you're looking at, at a high level, I don't think we want to get into the nuts and bolts of how the particular methodologies, but when you're sitting down with the team and you're actually, whether it's a sprint or however way you organize the work, having, mentioned that you are very transparent with your team in terms of, what your strengths and weaknesses are. How does that relationship with those, like the leads and seniors on your team, work to do the planning and some of the long-term work planning that needs to get done?
There's actually one other element that I forgot to mention, and that is making sure that everyone knows that there's a path forward in their career. If not in this team or organization, just a path forward in general. When you work for me, even if you're at the highest levels, you have a career plan that we talk about on the regular. That also helps to really keep people motivated. And where it ties into your question about how do you do the planning, I try and make planning not exclusive to the senior people. I try and do it as collaboratively as possible. Obviously, we get company directives about problems that we need to solve. We do almost every element of the planning together as a team. If there are a list of initiatives or outcomes that we need to get, we list them all out. And then as a team, we go through, what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to deliver this quarter? And not on the very low level details, but at a high level, what big things do we want to ship this quarter? And we just kind of do a brain dump. And after everyone's like, okay, all the ideas have been written out, we use a spreadsheet, something real simple on a shared screen. We then categorize them by priority and by impact. And we measure impact. It's a little bit of an organic measurement, but it's a combination of, does this reduce toil? Does this increase velocity? Does this improve our quality of life? Those kinds of things. And then also, obviously additional features and functionality. So after we've kind of grouped them all out by impact and criticality, we then do collaboratively again, and we slowly talk through this. And this really helps the more junior people. We talk about, okay, at a high level, what kinds of level of effort do you think will go into accomplishing that outcome? And that's a really interesting conversation and great to do collaboratively, because you have more junior people looking at the senior people who may decompose a problem in a way that they didn't consider. So they may take certain things for granted or not understand that there might be additional steps because it's maybe a new platform or process that they're not interacted with. So that helps them get exposure to some of these new things as well. But ultimately, we've now got a list of things we want to accomplish, and we've got all these metadata points around them. And then because we have a general idea of how long each thing will take, we'll take a look at what our availability is as a team versus what the total amount of our list is. And you often find it's like, something like at least the total amount of team time plus something. So we then start whittling away the low impact with the higher level of effort items until you come to a reasonable list. And this is all done collaboratively. So people can voice their opinions, feel consulted and heard, and kind of weigh in. So when we finally arrive at a list of things that we want to do, and this is obviously not a single meeting, this is a combination of group meetings, Slack channels, individual conversations, and kind of bake time in between, because you can't just sit down and come up with every idea right there on the spot. And we do our planning on a quarterly basis. So we had the opportunity to kind of revisit this process every quarter as well. But the next step is we then start to decompose these high-level deliverables into smaller bite-sized objectives and say, okay, success for this project means these 5 things, for example. And we keep it pretty high level. And this is one of my tricks to keep my engineers engaged when I'm not an engineering manager, is I make sure that the thing that everyone is working on is something they enjoy working on. So if it's solving for a problem, what a particular individual is passionate about, or using a technology someone is really a big fan of, I give them the opportunity to drive that project. Every member of my team, every full-time member of my team has at least a single project that they drive. And driving that project doesn't necessarily mean that they are the primary contributor of code. But what it does mean is they're responsible for taking the high-level objectives and breaking them down into bite-sized things, and then making sure that we have forward momentum. And then when we encounter problems, that those are surfaced up so that they or I can help unblock those problems and move forward. So you could have an engineer drive a project and actually contribute no code. That's entirely possible. Also, by doing it in this collaborative fashion, you eliminate silos within your team where, well, I don't know, that's so-and-so over there does that. Everyone kind of ends insight into what the roadmap is and why the roadmap was built out this way and kind of what's involved in that roadmap. But eventually you get to some more bite-sized milestones that need to be accomplished in order to deliver your ultimate outcome. At that point, I teach my team a little bit of project management skills. So we leverage an internal wiki tool called Confluence. And we actually, each project driver will create their own Confluence page on their project. They will call out the big deliverables. They'll call out the smaller things that need to be accomplished in order to achieve those deliverables. And they actually create a little Gantt chart with a timeline on it. And I find that the process of building this simple wiki page is actually very informative because it forces you to break down problems in such a way that you might take something for granted and just say, well, I assume this is probably going to take a week. But when you really think about what's involved in accomplishing that task, you go, oh, shoot, you know what? It's going to take more than that because of these reasons I wasn't thinking about or I took for granted. So the quality of the plan that you produce is a lot better by slowly working through all of this stuff. And these boards are generally done somewhat autonomously by the individuals running the program. And then we meet together as a team and review them all. What we also do is we have a biweekly team meeting where we go through and we review the project plan and the status updates for that project as a team. So even if you are not contributing to a particular project, you're in a meeting where you can see what's going on, which makes you feel more informed and more bought into the thing that we're trying to accomplish. And then long term, what we also do is it's important to keep ourselves honest as to the progress of the project. So if we're not trending towards meeting our goals, I put it on the team to call that out. We actually have a section in the page that allows you to call out the status of your project, red, green, and all that kind of stuff. If you're not green at the moment, I require a path to green. So you have to think through what needs to change, what has to happen between now and whenever in order to get this back on schedule and meet the goals that we originally committed to. And sometimes it's not possible. You have to rescope or cancel a thing or something like that. But it's by having the individuals go through that process, it drives personal ownership because they came up with the plan. They presented it to the team. They got feedback. It's their thing, which drives engagement. But also by going through all of these little steps, the quality of the plan that you've put in place is really, really good. And it's very informative. And then Confluence has a bunch of great tools for rolling up multiple pages into a single status page. So even managing up and showing the progress and state of projects to my leadership is as simple as I provide them a URL and they just look at a simple graph. They don't even have to ask me questions. They can click on the pages and they kind of teach them to fish style. They can go to these project pages and see the specific details. And they don't actually have to take the time to engage me directly or my engineers.
Very cool. Yeah, some of these are great concepts. I think the net of driving that personal ownership, which is really what you're doing, I like how you said has helped increase the quality of the plan and obviously the deliverable. And then the added bonus is you've given your management tons of visibility, which means your life is a hair more easier. So very, very cool.
Yeah, one of the concepts I make sure that my teams understand, this is just good concept to keep with their career. The ability to effectively manage up in a way that minimizes the amount of time out of your day to do so, it just pays out. So another side effect of using this process and creating these pages, I have two teams. I have 16 people that report to me, and it's really difficult to keep up to date on every single project by every single person and all that kind of stuff. However, with this method, and like I mentioned with my managers, without having to pull an engineer out of whatever he's doing and ask him for a status update or set up a meeting or something like that, I can simply go to their page. And we have an SLA of keeping that page up to date within a certain number of days, that kind of thing. I can see the latest updates according to that engineer. And if I got any questions, I can then go to the person. It just optimizes my interactions and it's less interrupts for the engineer, which all engineers respect. More consistent time to work on their projects instead of, piecemeal.
Absolutely. Very cool, man. I love it. There's a chock full of great insights and notes there in terms of how you have improved your team's productivity and efficiency. So I can't thank you enough for coming on to share. I was going to ask you, been starting to ask guests this, and I think it's an interesting component to the podcast we've included is there a topic that you'd like a future guest to talk about?
One of the things that I'm learning more about right now, and I would love to hear more about, is the intersection of design and engineering. So in the world of React, we are starting to leverage tools like Figma that allow us to render out beautiful interactive proof of concepts and models and wireframes, but do so in such a way that it directly informs the code. We can design elements and we can package them into a library that is then directly callable to the code. I would love to know more about the kind of evolution of that, because it used to be back in the day, you had basic CSS and HTML with a few things, and you were doing tools like Photoshop to do your mockups. And then you would have the front end guys send Photoshop mockups over to the engineers, who would then sit there and like measure pixels for distances to make sure the tables are set up correctly and all this kind of stuff. And now it's so much more effective and streamlined. And like with code, a lot of these libraries and design elements can be packaged into a repository that can be then referenced by the code itself. And you can now share these graphical assets in repos instead of just, here's my Photoshop file, or here's the folder on some network share that's got a bunch of the icons or something like that. It's a really interesting new world for me personally that I'd love to know more about.
Awesome. And if somebody wants to reach out to you to touch up on anything you've mentioned on the podcast, what's a good way of getting hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Clay Alvord. You can also reach me at clay@box.com.
Awesome, man. I certainly appreciate it. Thanks for coming on and sharing. I think it's been a great episode. I think a lot of great takeaways for people listening. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. I'm always asking you guys to share the podcast if you do find it useful and helpful. So I'll continue to do that. That's how we've been growing. So appreciate everyone who does that. And I'm going to ask a new ask, actually. So Clay obviously mentioned he'd like to learn a little bit more about the intersection of design and engineering. If you know someone that is doing some cool stuff in that area, as an expert that can talk to that subject, hit me up. Let me know. I'd love to have them on the show to address this. I'm sure not only Clay, but other people would like to hear about this as well. But that's it for this week. Until next time, goodbye.